In the lower slopes of the northern mountains, in a forgotten valley that barely sees the light of day, lie the expansive ruins of an ancient enemy. There, through dozens of hidden entrances, you can venture beneath the earth into the winding, labyrinthine tunnels. Cave-ins and illusions hide the truth of these dusty chambers. Beneath the apparent ruin is the hidden civilization of forgotten foes. Welcome back to the topic of creating a Megadungeon and fleshing out an enemy race. Welcome back, adventurers. My name is Ryan of the Red Quills, and I'm so pleased to be venturing back into the dark on this topic. In this episode of the Red Quills Guide to World Design, we will delve into the creation of one of the most iconic elements in Dungeons & Dragons and many other TTRPGs, the Megadungeon. Whether you're a seasoned dungeon master or just starting out, understanding how to craft an expansive, intricate dungeon will elevate your game to new heights. We'll explore its history, its purpose, and how to keep your players engaged as they navigate through its many layers. So, let's grab our maps and lanterns and get ready to venture into the depths. This episode is the long-awaited sequel to our fan-favorite How to Draw a Megadungeon. Not only was that episode hugely popular, but it sparked no end of questions and discussions that I promised to revisit, and now we're back. We'll talk about creating them, using them, filling them, and keeping your players interested. So, let's start, as always, with a blank page. In our previous video, the dungeon that I made, the map of the Azure Throne, was honestly a lot smaller than many mega dungeons for the purpose of practicality in making these videos. While this tweaked a couple of noses, there was a little discussion about what exactly a mega dungeon needs, and the concept of a mega dungeon is actually very loose. So to begin with, let's ask ourselves the important question. What is a mega dungeon? Technically, it's whatever you like. There are definitions out there, but they're often contradictory. The only real requirement of a mega dungeon is that it's a very large, self-enclosed area that a party of TTRPG characters can explore, ideally over several sessions. Examples of mega dungeons can include vast subterranean complexes like this one, separate dimensions of constantly changing areas, or enormous castles and abandoned cities. There are other suggestions for what a mega dungeon needs, like several floors or layers, multiple entrances and exits, separated areas populated with different races, but these are more like guidelines than actual rules. As always, remember Rule 0. The DM is the ultimate power in the universe. Mega dungeons have been a cornerstone of RPGs since the early days of Dungeons & Dragons. Originating from the earliest adventures, these sprawling, multi-level complexes provided exploration and challenges for players. The concept harks back to Gygax's infamous Castle Greyhawk and other legendary creations that offered both combat and lore in abundance. They are a great setting for short campaigns and closed quests, and modules for novice DMs because the environment is controlled. But they also have a maligned reputation as occasionally becoming boring, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Mega dungeons serve several purposes in a campaign. They act as central hubs of adventure. They offer countless opportunities for exploration, combat, and treasure hunting. They also provide a controlled environment where the dungeon master can introduce new elements of the story and test the player's skills in various scenarios. A mega dungeon is a great environment for a new DM, and while it does pose its own challenges, it can be much easier to run than a true open world. You can use them to force a confrontation, to provide stakes and pressure, or just to experiment with different concepts and encounters. The challenges of a mega dungeon are easy to list. Creating a controlled environment is easy. Making that controlled environment continually diverting and interesting is much harder. Repeating encounters, static ambiances, or a lack of stakes can really build player fatigue. Boredom and frustrations are the big fears for new DMs, but there are ways around them that we'll discuss. On the other hand, having a self-contained area like a mega dungeon, large enough to explore but small enough to be manageable, is a great boon to the beginner world builder. The players can understand the rules of the world more easily, gather information, and avoid the don't know problem. So, how do we create an interesting environment to explore? Creating a mega dungeon isn't just about drawing maps. I mean, it's a lot about creating maps. We love maps on this channel, but it's about making those maps come alive for your players. Before we talk about what to fill your mega dungeon with, we need to talk about what it looks like. And making a world that feels real is all about creating something that exists without your players' interference. Most maps aren't treasure maps. They don't cease functioning once you get to your destination. They can and should be used and reused over and over. If your players want to traipse through a Megadungeon and depopulate it as they go, then maybe the map won't be useful again. But if they can depopulate the entire place, then perhaps it's not quite difficult enough for them. And also they probably need to take a good long look at themselves in the mirror. Goblins are people too. Speaking of, let's start with the inhabitants. As I said in the previous video, a Megadungeon is more than just empty corridors and rooms. It's a living, breathing ecosystem. Start by thinking about the creatures and characters that inhabit this space. Are they hostile monsters, neutral denizens, or potential allies? Consider a mix of intelligent creatures with their own agendas and mindless beasts that pose a more straightforward threat. In this case, I'm creating what was once a city, buried in an ancient war. Over time, the survivors, afraid to come to the surface, dug themselves a warren deeper and deeper into the earth and began to develop distinct cultures and traditions. The Sthesic Vrasa is no more, but there are sections of the city inhabited by militant cultists who prey on the others, by simple workers kept trammeled by an entitled upper class, or by pragmatic communities that live closer to the surface, trying to walk the line between the world above and the world below. Have at least one kind of community per wing or level and make them distinct in their views towards outsiders, their methods of conflict resolution, and their trading and resource gathering. I have 3 kinds of rules that I use to make the dungeon interesting to the players. They are ambient, active, and reactive. Let me explain. The ambient rules are how the dungeon looks without the players in it. This one we already touched on. If the world feels like it's rendered moments before they arrive, the immersion is going to be difficult to achieve. So always ask yourself as you make the dungeon, what's happening? What changes over time without interference? The ambient rules aren't just about passive details, but about what exists without the prerequisite of involvement. The active rules are how the dungeon acts towards the players. You can move on to them once you finish the ambient rules. How will it be for the players? Who will give them a chance and who won't? Where are the traps, the puzzles, the things for them to find? Where are the enemies, or the friends, or the traders? A good tip that I have for this is to not populate each individual room with NPCs. Don't list rooms as being ancient armory. Pieces of forgotten metal and a cold forge sits in the corner. A kobold lives here. It's a good start, but it doesn't give the opportunity for them to change things by involvement. Instead, writes ancient armory. A kobold, Svalterboneneck, has made his den here after being driven away from his clan for theft. He resents them, writing messages of hate on the walls, and listens keenly for approach, hiding beneath the metal if anyone comes too loudly. That gives you the ambience of the room, a basic history of the inhabitant, some clues to the players to find out about the locals, and the prerequisites of whether they'll find him. Perhaps he'll be hiding, or even run. Or they can negotiate with him. If he hates his people, he might be willing to betray them. The last kind of rule is the reactive rule. This is how things change after they leave a room. Because as I said before, unless the players completely depopulate the world as they move through, things will be different for their involvement. If they kill Svalterboneneck, they could take the things that he stole back to their rightful owners and gain new allies. Or if they help him take revenge, the kobolds might survive and swear vengeance on the party. The big rules are the most interesting. The politics of Megadungeons exist in a relative balance until the arrival of the players, and maybe that can change, leaving the way for an all-out war or a transformative peace. More interesting is if someone within the dungeon notices their passing and begins to hunt them, gathering information about their methods and their abilities to ambush them. By the way, if you think that this resource is going to come in useful to you, you can check out our page in which we have dozens of other videos on more specific maps and charts. Additionally, you can become a member of the Red Quills on YouTube or Patreon for access to mapmaking discords, exclusive Q&A sessions, topic boards, and high-quality copies of the maps that I make, as well as early access to these videos and behind-the-scenes snippets. Let's talk about the layers of your dungeon. Creating a layered, multifaceted Megadungeon is essential for maintaining your players' interest and ensuring the environment remains dynamic and engaging. Each layer or section of your Megadungeon should offer unique challenges, themes, opportunities for exploration. The design of entrances and exits in your Megadungeon is crucial for controlling the flow of adventure. Multiple entrances and exits can make the dungeon feel more open and less linear, giving the players the freedom to choose their path. However, strategically placed choke points can help you control the pacing and ensure key encounters or plot points are experienced. The way that I make a Megadungeon is to create it in the sketch as I would, without any collapses or cave-ins or choke points, as it was originally constructed, if you will. And then I add them in, according to the ambient rules. How do the inhabitants defend themselves against each other? You can use keys to create contained fetch quests, negotiations through territory for roleplay, and so much more. When designing the different layers of your Megadungeon, consider the interests and play styles of your players. Are they more interested in combat, puzzles, or storytelling? Tailor the themes of each level to match these preferences. For instance, one layer might focus on ancient ruins filled with traps and puzzles, while another is a war-torn battlefield teeming with hostile factions. When you're starting out as a DM, a simple question to ask your players is, what does your character want? Boil it down to a single word and that will help you. You can create levels of the Megadungeon based around these concepts and use the history of the Megadungeon or the culture of its inhabitants to challenge your players' assumptions and provide them with some questions for them to explore. I've spoken a lot about filling your chambers in my previous video, the iterative rules, the fractal methods for making areas, and then chambers that have distinct fillings and functions. So I won't go over that again in this video, but I will mention them again in the light of having a reactive dungeon. Traps get reset. An encounter with a scouting party will mean that they don't report back. Puzzles were made by someone and will have consequences if they aren't reset. A party of players that want to take a rest in the darkness of a dungeon will need to be certain that they won't be disturbed for at least an hour, and possibly up to 8 hours. So let's talk about that more. The key to a successful Megadungeon is maintaining player engagement over multiple sessions. So here are some strategies to help keep your players invested and excited as they delve deeper into the depths. A well-designed Megadungeon gradually increases the stakes and challenges as players progress. Early encounters should set the tone and establish the dungeon's atmosphere, but the true dangers should escalate as they venture deeper. This progression keeps players on their toes and provides a sense of achievement as they overcome increasingly difficult obstacles. Consider introducing more formidable foes, complex traps, and intricate puzzles as the players advance. Additionally, you can raise the tension by incorporating environmental hazards like crumbling floors, rising floodwaters, or areas filled with toxic fumes. These escalating threats create a palpable sense of danger and urgency. Managing rest and exhaustion is crucial in a Megadungeon setting. Long rests may be difficult to come by, forcing players to make strategic decisions about when and where to rest. Consider incorporating safe zones or hidden sanctuaries where players can recuperate, but make these areas rare and potentially challenging to reach. Short rests can provide brief respites, but they should come with risks. Players might need to barricade themselves in a room, set up watch rotations, or find creative ways to secure their location. The constant threat of interruption or discovery adds tension and forces your players to be resourceful and, most importantly, think. Survival elements are uncommon and underutilized, especially in Dungeons & Dragons. It's why the Ranger class is undervalued. But they can enhance the realism and the difficulty of a Megadungeon. Tracking resources like food, water, and torches adds an extra layer of challenge and immersion. Players must plan their supplies carefully and make tough choices about what to carry and what to leave behind. And you can incorporate opportunities for players to find or scavenge resources within the dungeon. Maybe they discover a hidden cache of provisions, they trade with a neutral faction, or they hunt subterranean creatures for food. Balancing scarcity and opportunity ensures that the resource management maintains an engaging aspect of the adventure. Let's talk about what I have here and the map that I've just illustrated. Tol Fallent is a ruin beneath an abandoned valley in the mountains of Hendon. It is the domain of the exiles of the Thessic Vrasa, which was once the empire of Yuan-Ti that ruled Hendon about 1,000 years ago. They fought a war against the humans and were thought to be driven to extinction. But the survivors of the city of Tol Fallent moved to the caverns beneath the ruins in the hopes that they would survive and eventually be able to leave. But as the years and then decades passed, they couldn't find their way out of the territory of the humans that hated them, at least not without great risk. And so they tunneled further and further and built more and more until 1,000 years later, it is an extensive and complex city. And because it's a full city and it's inhabited by one people, there are a lot of politics and diplomacies that needs to be involved in the day-to-day running of the city. The various districts across the ruins of Tol Fallent all have varying perspectives on how they should deal with interlopers or people on the surface. They have farm caves to provide fuel. They have hunters and scavengers that move through the multiple entrances and exits that lead in and out of the city. They have defenses, like long corridors beneath the river above that can collapse, flooding them if someone enters the city to protect the rest of the inhabitants. They have places that even they won't venture to, deep beneath the surface, and relics of an ancient history that they worship and venerate and fear. I've started by creating the map itself, the isolinear style of the caverns that weave their way through. And though it may look like there are only 2 layers, if you look closely, especially on the bottom layer, you'll see that there is a great deal of verticality there. And the different layers, of course, have different responses to the surface according to their immediacy to the threat above. But then, of course, it's about deciding what's inside each of the chambers. And you'll notice that I have different symbols to indicate whether it's ambience or puzzle, trap, combat, or a critical encounter with an intriguing NPC. Then, of course, around the exterior, I've written the notes on the dungeon itself as a whole, and of course on the people and the individual chambers, so that someone who is running the dungeon can see as they go what they can encounter. And in that way, you can compress an entire Megadungeon into one A2 sheet of paper. Crafting a Megadungeon is a rewarding challenge that can provide countless hours of adventure for your players. By carefully designing its layers and inhabitants and dynamic elements, you can craft a compelling and immersive experience that keeps your players coming back for more. And remember, the key to a successful Megadungeon is not just in the layout and the encounters, but in the story that it tells and the way that it reacts to your players' actions. Keep the environment alive. Make the challenges diverse and escalating, and ensure that every room and corridor holds the potential for discovery and excitement. If you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, then please give it a like. Consider subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified whenever we release new content, and you can ensure you never miss an update. Also, don't forget to check out our page for the other videos on specific map styles and techniques. If you decide you want to become a member of the Red Quills and help to support the quality of this channel and help us make better and better videos, then you'll gain access early to all the videos that we release, and of course to the snippets and the behind the scenes sneak peeks of what we do. Check out the description below for more details. If you're interested in the lore of this specific map, you can check out the lore archive, which we release alongside these videos, so that we can explore how to create an adventure based on the maps that we've made for this series. Thank you for joining me, Ryan of the Red Quills, in this deep dive into Megadungeon creation. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights and inspiration for your own campaigns. As always, feel free to share your thoughts, your questions, and your Megadungeon stories in the comments below. Until next time, happy adventuring.